and I am the co-chair of the Master Plan Steering Committee. I'll let my co-chair introduce herself.
Hi, I'm Jessica Dunn. You might have gotten an email from me or seen a post. We've been trying to get the word out about the master plan. Thank you so much for all coming. We're eager to share what progress we've made so far and get some feedback.
So yeah, I'll just give a quick overview of where we are in the process and what the format's going to be tonight. We started this master plan process back in October, and we've had several different methods to get public input for our master plan. The first was a website that had a survey for people to provide comments on things that they wanted to see in our neighborhood, things that were important to them, things they loved, things maybe they didn't love so much, and things they wanted to fix. So we received a lot of input through the public website and the survey. The initial website also had an interactive map where people were able to identify specific points on a map that they wanted to address. It could have been something as specific as, this intersection needs a four-way stop sign. It's a nightmare. You know, I've seen bicyclists almost get hit a dozen times. Or bigger problems like highlighting Olive Monroe. Traffic's really bad here. So those are the types of things we saw on the interactive map and the survey. We compiled all of that information and had a public meeting last fall where we presented that information to the community and gave people ideas of the input that we received, some of the big ideas, big concepts that we were dealing with. After that first public meeting, we then had a second posting on our master plan website, and that provided more specific concepts for our neighborhood. And again, there was an opportunity to provide public input on those specific concepts. While all of this was ongoing, we also had a series of focus groups where we invited members of the community, particularly people who have specific expertise in particular issues, to attend focus groups to talk about specific topics. So for example, one of the focus groups we had was a commercial/business focus group. And we invited the owners of the businesses in the commercial nodes of Virginia-Highland to come, give us their input, the challenges they're facing as business owners, and things that can be done to improve the business district. So we ended up having about 6 or 7 focus groups. One of them was transportation, one of them was environment, one of them related to education, what we'd like to see as from a planning perspective for our schools. So we've had a lot of different sources to provide input into this master plan. Tonight, what we want to do is provide an overview of what we've received. This is what people have said they want to see for our community. After the presentation, we'll then have breakout sessions where you can go to these specific tables and look at particular topics. For example, Monroe. That was one of the main things we heard about through all this input process. How can we fix Monroe? So there's a poster over there, a table that will be dedicated to Monroe. What are the possible solutions for improving Monroe? This planning process has been run by a consultant that the Virginia-Highland Civic Association hired to facilitate this process. His name is Aaron Fortner, and his company is Market in Maine, and he's going to be running the presentation tonight. Aaron has worked on master plans for several communities near and dear to us, including Campbell Park. So he has worked with our sister neighborhoods through this process to develop a master plan. At the end of his presentation, before we go to the breakout tables, Aaron will provide an overview of next steps and when we expect to have the master plan draft presented to the community. So that's where we are. We really appreciate everyone coming and providing input. That's the most important thing for this process, is getting input, hearing what people want, hearing what people need, and we look forward to hearing all your comments. Before I bring Aaron up, I wanted to introduce Matt Westmoreland. He is our APS board representative for our community. So thank you to Matt for coming. He wanted to hear about our vision for our community and how we're going in particular, things about schools, I guess. That would be my guess. And we're also expecting some of our council members here who apparently are running a little late. But if they make it here, I'll make sure to introduce you all to them as well. So thank you so much for coming, and Aaron, turn it over to you. Thank you.
I'm really excited about tonight. When I was in middle school, I always wanted to yell in the library, and now I get to do it, so it's super exciting. Thank you all for coming out. This is always exciting to get to this part of the process, to be able to reflect back on the arc that we've been on. To start with the process that Jennifer articulated, where we start with just getting feedback, we can continue to refine that, and tonight get to project that back to you. So I'm excited about that. And just want to start off with coming back to what we talked about in our first public meeting several months ago, of what we're trying to do here. This is a neighborhood that's so amazing that people all over the region, cities all over the country, in the last 20 years have looked to Virginia-Highland to try to figure out what makes it work and how to try to recreate it. There's been really old neighborhoods that did not end up this successful. And then there's been new neighborhoods that have been built to try to be this successful. We've been a real model. And part of what makes that work is this idea of all these different things that are happening in the neighborhood. For the last 20 years, when we have grown and built neighborhoods, we've gotten rid of all this stuff. We just decided, let all the shops be where all the shops go, and then put that all over in that part of town, and then let all the neighborhoods be in another part of town, and let recreation and civic uses all get separated. And what we've realized as a country is that this kind of living, these kinds of neighborhoods where those things are all integrated together in close proximity within walking distance, that those really lead to really great places that people love to be. And so as we move forward, this is one of these ideas that we want to try to hold on to. And what's key about this is that you can see that there's just a lot of balance, there's a lot of give and take that goes into a neighborhood like this to make room for all these things. It's a lot of give and take. But that's what makes it so great. But that's what we keep in mind, as I think as you grow for the next 20 years, is how do all these different kind of things continue to live in a healthy balance together. And the other thing we're trying to do is create a city or a neighborhood that can grow over time but still hold on to a unique character. And I like using this example of New York, of Manhattan, where there's a story, there's a character of Manhattan that's hundreds of years old, but it all has happened on the same speculative island that used to be a little village. It used to be a trading colony. It used to be Indians that lived there. And it's turned into this, but it retains a character. And so what we want to do is continue to be a neighborhood that is rooted into some character, but can grow over time and can adapt over time and can be sustainable over time. Because if you get stuck in the past and you don't continue to evolve and keep up, you can fall behind. But you also want to do that in a way where you retain a character that's true about who you are as a community. And that's really the challenge that's before us. So a little bit about the process that we use to do this. We have this sort of three-phase process where we like to discover a community, and then we start to design the things that we're learning about what we've discovered, the problems, the opportunities, and we start to come up with designs and ideas and concepts from what we've discovered. And then we conclude that with the documentation of that, and that will be your master plan. But in the middle of this process is really where I think that's the exciting part of the process, where with the problems we discovered, the opportunities discovered, the solutions and the concepts come into play. But then when the solutions come into play, you throw those out there, which is what we did at the charrette. And when you do that, you learn some more. As we threw out concepts, we learned by just throwing concepts out. And that's really why we do that early in the process. We like to throw ideas out there because we learn more about who you are and what you want by throwing ideas out there. So we've done that. We have these ideas and concepts that have been up on the website as well. And tonight we're going to present that, how we've tweaked some of that and modified that and created new concepts based on what we've heard. But we're at this point in the process where we're really finishing the design part of the process. You can't design and plan for a year, for 2 years. You really have to have a focused process where there's a finite amount of time for that. Because you can go on forever and ever and ever. And so we're at the conclusion of that part of the process. And tonight is really part of how we want to land these concepts and ideas. We want to get feedback tonight, but then we're going to transition into starting to document the conclusion of the process and what we found. So I want to throw out to you some of the ideas for where we are and what we think this master plan will say. And everything I'm going to present from here on in is what's at these tables. And all of these things have comment sheets. And what I'd like for y'all to do is to hold your comments here, but to go to whether it's the vision or any of the concepts that I'll present, and to make sure you give us your feedback and the comments at the table. So we want to articulate through this master plan what the community vision is in terms of 10 years, 20 years, 30 years. Who is Virginia-Highland? What do you want to be? And this vision reflects what I think we've heard through the process so far. There's some key things that seem to be important to the community. One is that it keeps coming up through our process that this is a neighborhood where people care for each other. And this idea of neighborliness and being good neighbors to each other keeps coming up. That doesn't come up in every neighborhood we work in. There's a lot of neighborhoods who would like that to be their character, but it's not yet. But it is here, it seems to be. And that's important. And we want to just reflect that and make sure that that's something that is in this vision for what the community wants to be in, say, 20 years' time. That should still be true, right, in 20 years' time. There's this other really big idea that's emerged that I'm really excited about. And it's this idea of Virginia-Highland as Atlanta's model premier neighborhood for healthy living. And that really captures a lot of different things. That can be exercise, that can be physical health, so running, biking, walking, the parks and the playgrounds. That can also be, that can be environmental, that can be sustainability, that can be food and diet and agriculture. And so just a lot of the comments that we've been getting in the last 3 months, you really could fit into this broader category of we just want to be a healthy community. And if you think about it, in Atlanta, there's really not that model neighborhood that is Atlanta's healthy neighborhood. That place you look to say, yeah, that's really what they're about. That's their identity. That's their goal. That's their vision. There's neighborhoods that are trying to fix transportation. There's neighborhoods that have a great park. But there's really not a neighborhood yet that's their identity. And that really has come across so strongly in the process. I think that's really exciting. Another part of the vision is to be a neighborhood that safely accommodates for all modes of transportation. There's been a lot of commentary on wanting to be able to make sure cars drive safely and appropriately through the neighborhood. But the same thing for walking, same thing for biking. Now with the Beltline as a resource that's so close to the neighborhood, on the edge of the neighborhood, that there's more of a desire to be able to get to the Beltline by walking or biking to it. So this idea of safe modes of transportation, for all modes of transportation, is something that came across very strongly. We also really heard that there's a desire to see the neighborhood commercial districts, the 3 that you have within your neighborhood boundary, that they stay vibrant, they stay dynamic. And I think people in the neighborhood identify with the commercial districts as a real part of what they love about the neighborhood. One of the more negative comments we heard that had a lot of consensus around it was the vacant storefronts down at the St. Charles node. and a desire to see those active again and to see them occupied. So there's a real clear commentary from the neighborhood so far about the health and the vibrancy and the long-term sustainability of those commercial districts. So that's a real anchor, I think, to the vision of the community. This other idea has emerged of this value of different people, different types of people being able to live in the neighborhood. So people who are in different stages of life. So it may be the student, or it may be the single, or the starter family, or it may be the empty nester, or the retiree, or the senior. That there be an opportunity for people to live in the neighborhood, or some people were saying that they themselves would like to see a place for them in the neighborhood. That there was going to be a point in time where they may not need their house, but it sure would be nice if they could find a way to continue to live in the neighborhood. So this idea of having a diversity of options for living in the neighborhood really came across. This idea also of the schools and the value of the school, especially in the middle, but certainly Morningside, certainly Grady, that the schools are really valuable to the health of the neighborhood, to the value of the neighborhood. And so that's something that again and again kept coming up as what people wanted to see, that continue to support the schools. And then lastly, there's just this idea of this community, what I just call community character or community aesthetic, that a lot of people said they thought that should be preserved. A lot of times that would come up. There are a lot of comments and a lot of commentary, especially through the website, about some of the big boxy kind of housing that's gone in, newer housing in the last 10 years or so. And that some people feel like that has lost a little bit of the character, doesn't reflect the character of the neighborhood. So this idea, whether it's the homes or whether it's the commercial businesses and new development that may go into commercial nodes, is this idea that there is a certain character to the neighborhood that ought to be retained. And what I'd like for you to do is you break out later and go to the comments. I'd love for you to tell us if we're missing a vision statement. If there's something else we're missing, I'd like to hear that tonight from you all. So be thinking about that. Okay, so we also then dive deeper, and we're going to get into recommendations here. So these are the concepts and the recommendations that we want to put forward for you as your master plan tonight. And be listening to this and be thinking about, no, I don't like that, or yes, I like that, and I want to make sure I support that, or hey, you're missing something. Okay, and then when you go to the comments, make sure to write any of that down. So this idea is diving deeper into this concept of a healthy community. And as I said, I'm so excited about this for your neighborhood, because there's not a neighborhood in Atlanta that has claimed this. Even in the region, there's not a neighborhood in the region that this is their identity. And why not here? It's such a great identity. It's an identity that you're already really well along the road to being this kind of a neighborhood. You don't have to start at zero. You're not starting at scratch to try to become a healthy neighborhood. It's really how the neighborhood is built as it is. But I love that this could be your identity, your brand, because it's just something that I think really resonates with who we are as a country today and different demographics. So one of the ideas is to leverage public spaces to showcase and foreground what it means to be a healthy neighborhood. So here's just some examples, just some ideas. It could be the Triangle Park at Virginia-Highland. It could be the Beltline. It could be New Highland Park. It could be any of these places where you look for opportunities to model something that continues to promote you and your neighborhood as a healthy community. So here's an example of public art in a park in Chattanooga that's solar power. It's a solar power generator, and it's powering the lights in the park through solar, but it's art. Here's an idea This is an example of a park. I actually don't know where that is. I need to find that out. But this is a collection station for pet waste, and that turns into methane, which powers the lights in the park. Pretty interesting idea. Or it could be a rooftop garden. There's a couple ideas we have for how that could happen for you. Maybe the new Inman Middle expansion could have a rooftop garden on the rooftop of the new building and leverages it out as an opportunity as an educational opportunity for healthy living, healthy eating, for agriculture, but also can work with the community to sponsor it, to maintain it. Or another idea would be on the west side of the Beltline, you have the rooftops of all these commercial buildings on the west side of the Beltline, and you have Whole Foods. And perhaps the top of Whole Foods could be an opportunity for a rooftop garden that goes along with their marketing and their identity, but is an opportunity for you as a neighborhood to have access to a community garden. These are the kinds of things that we think you should look for opportunities to create public spaces that are promoting healthy living, and also just creating something that's a great resource for your neighborhood. We think you should look for those opportunities wherever you can. Partner also with the business association. Well, there isn't one. That's one of our recommendations. But with the businesses, partner with the businesses and the neighborhood association to work with them to promote the neighborhood as this healthy living destination. Also, another idea would be to start a community rain barrel art contest and to see once a year who can have the most creative rain barrel and something that you get excited about as a community and promote that. Another idea is to partner with South Face Institute, which is really a premier leading organization for sustainability and environmental awareness. They love working with communities like this. I just worked with them where they're working pro bono for the Candler Park neighborhood to help them implement some of these ideas that came out of their master plan. And I think you could work with them in a similar way to help businesses or residents think through cost-effective ways to integrate environmental sustainable features into businesses or into housing. So these are all some of the ways we think you can go down this path of defining the neighborhood as a healthy community. Okay, land uses. Some big ideas here. So the first thing is to just continue to enforce and support this idea that the neighborhood values the existing single-family zoning in the neighborhood. The more successful you are as a neighborhood, the more there's pressure and will be pressure for single-family properties to change and rezone into something higher density. And you already have a significant amount of apartment and multifamily in the neighborhood and on the edges of the neighborhood. And it's been a long-standing goal of the neighborhood to retain the single family that you still have. And we want to continue to support that, and just we can't miss this process as a chance to continue to put that flag in the ground, that stake in the ground, and say, yes, that is important to the neighborhood. The other idea we have is we really want to try to bring some ideas, some solutions to the lack of parking for the commercial nodes. And so one of these ideas is to work with the Druid Hills Presbyterian Church that actually fronts on Ponce. They have a pretty large parking lot that has about 120 parking spaces. And they would be happy to integrate that parking into the larger St. Charles commercial node. They're really agreeable to that notion. And if that property was able to be pulled into the neighbor commercial node, then legally, from a zoning perspective, the businesses in the St. Charles node could have their parking in that parking lot. And what's great about that too is you have there this idea of an existing resource of a parking lot that's not used for much of the day that could then be used and used more efficiently and it lessens the demand maybe for more parking in other locations. So we really like that idea and think that's one that should be pursued to add to the inventory of parking within the St. Charles node. Obviously, you need a little bit of some more detail there. There would need to be a clearly delineated wayfinding and maybe some lighting and a little bit of some cleanup to make sure the connection between that parking facility and the node was stronger. But it's so close, and there's no reason why that can't happen. This is a really big idea. So we did get a lot of, and I mentioned this before, a lot of commentary on the new housing that's been going into the neighborhood, say the last 10 years or so. And so there's a few different tools you can use, and there's a few different approaches you can take to address that. Some communities have used historic districts to do that. That's certainly an effective way to do it. Even in Atlanta, something was done, and an ordinance was passed that helped to make sure that new housing wasn't allowed to put a whole lot of dirt on the property and now have its first floor 10 feet up above the street. So that was something that the city of Atlanta already did. But here, what we're recommending is this idea that it's not a historic district, but it's something that's just called design guidelines. And what this means is that you would explore this idea as a neighborhood of articulating what are some of the basic concepts of aesthetic or community character that you think really define housing in Virginia-Highland, and articulating that and regulating it through design standards. So as an example, some communities that use these to say, okay, well, we want to make sure that all the houses have a certain requirement for windows. So you can't have a big blank wall. We want 30%, 40% of the facade to have windows on it. So that's a design requirement. There's certain building materials that we want to see or that we don't want to see. We don't want you to have a big chain link fence on the side of the property. So there's some design standards, some building materials that go along with that. It could be the garage. Sometimes design standards are used to say, we don't like the garage door fronting the street, or we don't like a garage door that looks like a garage door, we want it to look a little bit differently. And so design standards get used to articulate some aesthetic and regulate some aesthetic. The key difference between design standards and historic districts is that historic districts are really effective at preserving existing structures. So they really help make it difficult, they make it more difficult to get a demolition permit. Whereas design standards don't get into that. It's not about keeping a building or not. It just says whatever you do, there has to be a certain design to it, and it doesn't make it harder to demolish a structure. That's the key difference. And I think where you are as a community and what we heard, I think this could be an approach that resonates and helps to address this issue of the aesthetics of the community and the new housing that's been going in. Okay, here's another really big idea. All right, so I mentioned that this idea of affordability is one that really has emerged through our process. And just the people we've talked to through the process, whether it's a public meeting or some of our focus groups, we got to talk to a lot of different people who love living in the neighborhood, but they live in very small housing, some of the older apartments, and they love it. And the question comes up of, where's the place for us long term? We're not quite ready for, the bigger house, but we are ready to move out of the 1 bedroom or the small 2 bedroom. And what is the option for us? Or even folks that we talked to who were really ready for that point soon to move out of the big house. And they've been there for a long time and are ready to move out of that house and are asking that question, where's a place for me to stay in this neighborhood that I really love? And so one of the ideas that we are putting forward tonight is this idea of the accessory dwelling unit, which is, there's several terms for that. It could be the carriage house, or some people call it the granny flat, but it's the living unit that's at the back of the property. Now, there can be some real negative elements associated with that. There can be a negative part of that. And so what I'm putting forward here tonight is some of the criteria that I think can address what those negative issues are. And I want you, when we go to the comments, I want to make sure to hear what you think about this. But one of the ideas is to make sure that these are of a size that really can accommodate like a 2-bedroom, 2-bath. That's, I think, a living condition that a lot of the demographics of the country and the region fit into, where a lot of people no longer need the 3-bedroom or the 4-bedroom, but it's really bigger than just a 1-bedroom. And I think that 1,000 square feet accommodates a 2-bedroom, 2-bath. I think it has to have parking on site. We can't add more housing, more units into the neighborhood without parking for it, so it would have to have parking on site, not on the street. It would have to be architecturally compatible, so it doesn't stand out and look like a shed in the back and somebody living in it. It would have to really feel and look like the main house. It'd have to protect adjacent properties from visibility. So this idea of screening and no visibility from windows or doors on immediately adjacent properties, that would all be focused internally to the property. And then even this idea to make sure this new development is environmentally sensitive, that it can integrate water conservation fixtures within the square footage itself. So these are just some of the ideas that we want to put forward, and really what we want to do tonight is just say, okay, let's figure out what the issues with these may be and see if we can figure out how to address that and not abandon it altogether. Now, this would be a hard thing to implement because in the zoning right now, for most of the neighborhood, you're not allowed to do these. So there's many hurdles to even getting this done. But we want to try to find a way to make sure in 20 years or 30 years, there really is a viable option for different ages, for different stages of life, for people to be living in the neighborhood and not have to leave or not be prevented from living here just because they can't afford the really huge house. Okay, so North Highland. So we have some ideas for North Highland. I want to focus on the St. Charles node on this first one. So the idea we want to throw out for North Highland is this idea of making the street what's called sharrows. So this is a term that's used in transportation planning. It's when the lane, the travel lane, gets marked so that it's shareable by bikes and cars. And legally, every street is shareable by a bike or a car, but when you sign that and you put that marking on a street, it's just a little bit of a stronger way to note and to make the driver aware that, hey, there may be a biker on the street. And then what we're proposing here is to retain the on-street parking on the east side of the street, so the side of the street that's away from the businesses. And then on the west side, the side that's closest to the businesses, we like this idea of gradually and slowly having the on-street parking on the west side turn into expanded sidewalk. And now keep in mind, we really feel strongly that pulling in the 120 parking spaces at the church and linking that to the node can be a real viable option for parking in the node. Because we don't want to necessarily get rid of any parking unless we have a better solution for parking. And we think that church parking lot can do that. And then this idea is, if you see this here, there's this idea of, has anyone heard of this idea of parklets? Has anyone heard of this? Yeah, so it started in San Francisco, and now it's kind of popping up in New York and Philadelphia and Chicago and all over. And it's kind of a cheaper way for sidewalks and streetscape to get expanded. You know, it's really expensive to widen sidewalks and to pave it and move the curb. It's actually pretty expensive. And we think about your commercial districts in St. Charles, there's about 4 blocks of your commercial district, and the thought of that cost, it can be pretty expensive. It doesn't mean that's something you shouldn't do long term, but in the short term, we think it could be a really great idea to use these parklets, which is it's a temporary flooring, and so usually it's something that's made out of wood, and it's put into the space where the parking space was, and it becomes an extension of the sidewalk. And people in these cities are turning them into all kinds of things. They're turning them into little parks, they're turning them into gardens, they're turning them into outdoor dining, and extensions of the fronts of the restaurants. And it really is great on these sidewalks where it's so narrow, where you can barely just even walk on it, which is exactly what you have at St. Charles on North Highland. It's barely wide enough to walk on. And by putting in an extension of the sidewalk, you can add the streetscape amenities that right now you just can't have on that part of the street. I think that could also be a way to generate a little bit of some new buzz and excitement about Virginia-Highland. There's this idea we've heard from folks and some of the businesses that I think has got a lot of truth to it, that Virginia-Highland was sort of the place to go 20 years ago, and now there's so many cool places in Atlanta, right? There's Ponce City Market and Inman Park Village and the West Side, and there's a lot of cool places to go. And I think something like this could be a fun way for Virginia-Highland and the commercial districts to retain an element of newness. There's something new happening there. It's something that's fun and different. And it's a great resource, widening the sidewalk and making the pedestrian environment a better experience than it is today. But again, I think it's key that the parking down at the church is a part of that, to make sure there really is an abundance of parking for people who need to get to the node. There's some basic concepts also we have for North Highland. There's several places where the curbs are just broken, sidewalks are in disrepair. That needs to get fixed. We want to see bike share stations get integrated in key locations throughout these nodes. It's a great opportunity to co-locate bike parking. We still think this idea of there's a few places in the nodes that long term could handle a small scale parking structure, very small scale. The zoning in these nodes only allows for 42 feet in height, so it's just a little bit bigger than a single family neighborhood zoning district. So it'd be very small scale, but we think long term you should still look at those locations for those possibilities. And the last one I'll hit on is that I love this idea of, you guys heard of the pedicabs? Sounds like something you ride in to get a pedicure. That's not what it is. So down here in the bottom, there's certain cities that you see the cyclists that have their cabs. And on the back, they have 3 seats, 2 seats, and people are using these to go relatively short distances. But North Highland is a great place for this, because you've got 3 nodes that are all relatively close in distance, a little bit too far to walk to all of them at a regular basis, just for people who are coming and going out to the nodes. But it's so easy to bike. And also, there's this little bit bigger of a loop that could be made from the Beltline to Ponce City Market with Ponce and North Highland and Virginia. That would be a great circuit and a great loop for a pedicab. And again, these are the kinds of things, this is a great way to have a differentiator for the Virginia-Highland commercial nodes. This doesn't, sometimes the differentiators, people think it's got to be, a new bar or a new club. Well, these are great differentiators. These fit well into the fabric of a community. They're fun. Kids love them. It's sort of just a very friendly approach. It's environmentally clean, and it's a great way to differentiate yourself, and again, to be this neighborhood that is this healthy neighborhood. Okay, linear. Some concepts for linear. We heard a lot from folks about, those in the median of linear, when you're ever trying to cross the median, and some of those are so wide that you're crossing and then the person is crossing at the same time, and no one really quite knows where to line up. because the medians are so wide and the cut through there is so wide. So we want to tighten that up and make the lane demarcation stronger to make that clearer. We like this idea of leveraging the median as a path in a garden, but to do that in a way that you can't do that in a way where you're paving. It would have to be sort of a nature trail kind of experience where it doesn't disrupt the tree roots that are already in there today. But it could be much more of a resource than it is now. It's a beautiful green median and it could be used in a better way. There's a couple of the curves and the intersections where there needs to be no parking that is not there today. And then we like this idea of designating Lanier as a bike route. So it's a way to kind of get around North Highland if you want to get from Virginia, North Highland up to the Morningside node. Okay, Monroe Drive. So this is a concept that has been in a couple different plans before this. So there was the Beltline plan that this was integrated into, and then there was a citywide transportation plan that this was a part of. And so we're sort of inheriting this into our process and trying to see if we can find anything to make better about it. But the idea here is, that's been studied and engineered, is that you have the 2 lanes south today and the 2 lanes north. And because that inner lane turns into a turning lane for anybody who's going in that direction needs to turn, that lane, that inner lane on both sides doesn't carry a full capacity of cars and traffic because that lane is always turning and people have to get out of that lane and go around it. So what's been studied and engineered and approved by the city is this concept of a road diet where you take that inner lane and turn it into a both-way turning middle turn lane, and then the outer lanes carry the through traffic. And those through traffic lanes don't have to have that pattern of somebody gets in and then they get out and they get in and they get out. It's just a smooth flow of traffic, and then the center lane becomes that turn lane. What we've added to that is a couple things. Before, in the previous plans, it wasn't clearly articulated whether that extra road width was going to be dedicated to bike lanes or wider sidewalks, because there's some extra width there that comes out of the street that is going to go to one of those 2 things, wider sidewalks or bike lanes. And so what we've heard through this process as we vetted that is the preference would be currently to make that bike lanes, and then eventually as the Beltline bike path continues to go up through Piedmont Park, that eventually that could be turned into wider sidewalks and converted to wider sidewalks. The other thing we've added is at the park intersection, so the Monroe and Park intersection is making that a green roundabout as part of making that interchange kind of flow more smoothly. So 10th and Virginia and Cayuga, here's another concept that again was planned by the city as part of the Beltline planning, and again it was in the citywide transportation plan, so we've inherited this idea. And this idea is to eliminate that Virginia split at Woody's, and to retain the sort of southern portion of that split and have it be the main intersection now for Virginia, down at Monroe and Virginia. But the thing we've added to this concept is the idea of Cayuga, of taking Cayuga and creating a 2-way bike connection on Cayuga, because there still needs to be on Virginia a connection from Virginia Avenue to the Beltline. There's not a great way to do that right now. Right now, if you're on Virginia, the Beltline is below, and you have to either go through the Midtown Shopping Center parking lot, or you have to just wind your way around Monroe and get to it. So Cayuga is a safer way to delineate this bike connection from Virginia down to the entrance of the Beltline. Okay, St. Charles. So St. Charles, the concept here, from Ponce Place to North Highland, there's enough room on St. Charles to create a bike lane on both sides of the street without removing any on-street parking and without changing the existing travel lanes. Right now, there's one lane in each direction, they're just really wide. And then there's on-street parking. Well, there's enough room to keep all of the two travel lanes and the on-street parking, but to add 2 bike lanes. And you can do that from Ponce Place all the way to North Highland. So that's pretty simple. So what we've added here is this concept of, wouldn't it be great if you could connect to the bike lanes that are now on Ponce, where Ponce City Market are, that go all the way west. And wouldn't it also be great if there was a way to connect to the Druid Hills Park along Ponce? So that on a bike or as a pedestrian or as a jogger, you could go along the Druid Hills Ponce parks, through Freedom Park, and then all the way on the Beltline and all the way west on Ponce if you wanted to on bike. So we've articulated here and identified a way on Ponce, right across from Ponce City Market, how behind the CVS, next to the CVS, there's already a little worn path, if you guys have seen that goes behind it. People are using to get back and forth between the Beltline and Ponce City Market and Ponce. And so there's enough room there that could be made into a real connection that can go back and forth between Ponce and the Beltline. And then we also think there's a way along Ponce Place. There's a way to carve out on the west side of Ponce Place. There's a kind of a bigger apartment complex there that's got a nice kind of big little front yard and parking area in front of it. There's enough room there to carve out like an 8 to 10 foot connection there along Ponce Place for the bikes that are coming off the Beltline to then get over to St. Charles. And then the idea would be east of North Highland, you can't really do much with St. Charles, but it's a slow street, it's a neighborhood street. You don't need to add bike lanes on that part of St. Charles. And so the bikes can go and pedestrians can go east on St. Charles to Briarcliff. And then on the east side of Briarcliff, if we can slow down that intersection, create a pedestrian crossing at that intersection, then we can carve out a little bit of frontage where the church is, in front of the church parking lot, for a direct connection to the Ponce and Briarcliff intersection to get right to the Druid Hills trails. So that's our concept, that's our idea. And then all of a sudden, St. Charles becomes the neighborhood's west to east bike ped connection that gets you to Druid Hills Parks and Freedom Park, and then gets you to the Beltline. Virginia Avenue, so this one, we had looked earlier on, some of y'all might remember, we looked into this idea of could you possibly get bike lanes on Virginia? There really is no way to do that without having to eliminate at least one side of on-street parking on Virginia. And after hearing all of the comments and all the feedback, that just doesn't seem like something that most people want to do. So the idea that we have now that we're putting forward is this idea that would retain parking on both sides of Virginia, would keep the 2 travel lanes, one in each direction. And what it would do is would add a bike lane on one side of the road. And it would be the side of the road that is the uphill climb, the incline. So what that would mean is imagine from Cayuga to Barnett. From Cayuga to Barnett, you're going up to Barnett. It's uphill to Barnett. So what would fit there is a bike lane on the south side as you're climbing up to Barnett, and then just a sharrow in the lane on the north side heading west. So again, the sharrow is just the signage on the street that just notes that this lane is shared by bikes and cars. And then on the east side of Barnett, as you go from Barnett to Virginia, the bike lane could be fit on the north side of Virginia, all while keeping the parking, the on-street parking. And then the sharrow would get moved to the south side of Virginia. And keep in mind too that whenever these things go in, whenever these lines get striped on a street, it forms a little bit of a traffic calming device because the roadway lines get moved in a little bit, and it gets clearer, it gets a little bit more structured. And that's always more controllable than a street pavement that has no real clear lanes and very wide lanes. So these things help to serve as traffic calming as well. We heard a lot about right here at Inman Middle and some of the traffic calming that needs to be achieved right here at Inman Middle. So some of the things we've noted here is this idea of right here on Park, being able to pull in a little bit off the street and carve out a bus drop-off area just right here on the side of Park. Because it's going to get more and more challenging to be able to park and the buses to park at Inman Middle. So this idea of carving that out is what we're putting forward. Also, we have this idea to try and raise the street level right here on Park, and to create a different texture and maybe even a different color of the street, so that it creates something that visually for drivers is different than the rest of the street. If the elevation of the street and the color of the street and maybe even the texture of the street changes, then for the driver, this is a different zone. This is a different thing I'm driving on. It's not the street that I drive on to just get to where I need to get fast. This is a different area, and it can help to communicate that this is slow, this is different, and that you're not just on a fast-moving street. Here you would want to call out that this is very important for the school and for drop-off and for getting to the school, and we could do that right on Park. We want to add some features and details to the driveway right here that comes out at Arcadia. That can be a real mess at pickup and drop-off. And so we want to make the crosswalks, we want to put crosswalks there so it's clear that that's an intersection and that people can cross there, and the cars are going to be stopping there on occasion to let cars out of the parking lot. And then also there's this idea of making sure that back on Clemont, that we don't let people just sort of stand and stage back there, but that's got to keep moving. And that's something that's a street that's got to be usable by the residents and neighbors, and that's got to stay a usable street. Two other things real quickly. We think that it's possible to delineate a playing field, a ball field, or a softball field potentially in the park or in the playground space for the school. And so we like to help kind of show that, how you could actually get a ball field in the playground. And then the last thing is this idea of so many people commented on the Field of Dreams as something that's really not particularly aesthetically pleasing as you kind of roll into Virginia-Highland. And a lot of people commented about it would be great if that looked better. And so we like this idea, you see a little bit of it here, of turning that into an opportunity to create a living, green, vertical wall that is basically, it's a vertical garden. And it can work a lot of the ways that a horizontal garden works, but it can be a really great opportunity to work with the neighborhood and the school and the kids to turn this into agriculture and gardening, but a vertical version of it that also doubles as a really great gateway, as a really great welcome to Virginia-Highland sort of moment as you drive in to this part of Virginia-Highland. Okay, Barnett Street. So Barnett Street's so interesting. It's a fast street. It's kind of narrow. It's 31 feet wide. So it's not that it's excessively wide, but what's weird about Barnett is it doesn't, if it was full of parking, it would be a really slow street. Because at 31 feet, it's very difficult to have parking on both sides and to drive two cars. So if people did park on both sides, it would be a very slow street, but it's not a really slow street because there's usually not a lot of parking on Barnett. So there are in a few key spots, there's a few of those apartments that have some of that. So the idea here is to turn this again into a biking opportunity and a ped opportunity. There's enough room on Barnett, and this is again another one of these new ideas we really want to get you to weigh in on so we can know if this is a good idea or not. But there's enough room there to get two one-way biking and to keep two-way travel for the cars. And then what it could do, what Barnett could do, is it could start to become this north-south spine of the neighborhood, that you don't have to go to North Highland to try to bike on North Highland. That's always probably going to be a little bit harder, especially if you have kids. This becomes that slower, quieter, middle of the neighborhood street that has the potential to connect Freedom Parkway on the south and Howell Park in the middle. And then there's actually an alley that works its way just to the side of the school, an old alley that works its way where you could get to Orm Park. And you could weave this connection together from Orm Park to the middle and to the southern side and connect the parks of the neighborhood and all through this Barnett spine. And at the same time, this could help to slow down Barnett. It could help to be a traffic calming device. There's also room out on the key intersections of Barnett to put these smaller little mini circles that again just form a traffic calming device. You know, what makes cars go fast is when you just see wide open pavement. That's when you kind of want to go a little bit faster. And when there's something right in the middle of your site like this, it just helps to slow down traffic. And there's room at those intersections to do those and still accommodate traffic. And we think this could be sort of a green zone for Virginia-Highland. Okay, so then there were several comments from folks who lived on Maryland and some of these just local neighborhood streets about cars that just drive too fast. And so we want to put forward this concept of the chicane or the bulb out. And those have to be done right. You know, sometimes those aren't done right. We always hear about the example on McClendon and Candler Park, that those are too wide, and I think they are too wide. But I think there's a way to do those where they're not that wide, or they're in a right location where they can help to deflect traffic. They can move the curb line in a little bit, and that helps to slow down the driver. We think these are a better option than just the humps, the speed humps. We think these are more attractive. We think that these are kind of more consistent with the character of the neighborhood. These can be very green. And I think that these are things that could work. A few things that we're noting here that could be opportunities for that oftentimes we don't think about these, is wherever there's places where if there's a no parking zone or a fire hydrant, that can be a great opportunity for just a little bump out because there wasn't parking there anyway. You can pull the curb in just a little bit. Anywhere where you're close to an intersection, you can't park right at the corner of an intersection anyway. And so by bringing the curb a little bit in, it can be a great opportunity to slow down that traffic, also make the distance for the pedestrian to cross the street a little bit shorter. And then also another opportunity is on a lot of these streets, the driveways between houses are so short, they're short enough that you can't park there, but it's wide enough that you could actually do a little bit of a bump out. And it all helps to just, again, communicate that this street is a little bit slower. So we think you should explore on these streets those kinds of opportunities. And then at the major intersections on these streets and major roads, put in crosswalks. Because a lot of these streets, when they get to the major streets, they don't have crosswalks. And crosswalks are just another easy tool. It's just paint. It's just an easy tool to communicate to the driver that you have to stop or slow down at this intersection. Okay, and lastly, there's just sort of what I'm just calling additional concepts. There's a lot of things we heard that maybe don't apply just to a certain street, or maybe just to one particular topic. And we're kind of just sort of catching all those things right now. And when we create the master plan, we're going to include all of those concepts and ideas in the master plan. And tonight, we just want to make sure that you know that we have those. That we've heard those, and we think they're good ideas. Now, we may be missing some, so tonight, when you get to that table that has the other ideas, if there's something that you think is a great idea, that it doesn't fit in any of these categories, but you just still think it's a good idea, we want you to tell us.